Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 25th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "For it is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them, and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, 'Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master.' Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master replied, 'You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and I gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The Gospel of the Lord. Many of you probably recall Bill Cosby's famous routine where he's playing Noah talking to God about building the ark. So God begins, "Noah, I want you to build an ark. Make it 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. "Right," says Noah. "What's a cubit?" Because weights and measures don't make a whole lot of sense usually, at least the weights and measures that we read about in the Bible. So if you were paying attention to the parable I just read, you should have stopped and went, "Right, what's a talent?" Because we use that word in English, but it means something entirely different when Jesus used it here in this parable. In Jesus' day, a talent was a measure of money. It was actually a weight of silver, and it was equal to 6,000 days' pay for an average worker. So, in today's dollars, that means that this talent that this guy was given, even 1 talent, was worth well over $1 million. And that was more than the average person would have expected to see pass through their hands in over 20 years of work. And it's important to remember that because sometimes we've read this parable, a lot of us have heard this parable before, and we're tempted to think about this and go, "Oh, well, you know what? One guy, he has 5 of whatever these things are. Another person has 2 of whatever these things are. But that poor guy at the end, he only has 1. You know what the song says? 1 is the loneliest number. You know, it says, if you only have 1, oh my gosh, you don't have very much. You can be expected to be really worried about losing it. But that's not how Jesus' first hearers would have heard this parable. Those people would have heard Jesus describe this guy getting over $1 million, and they would have thought, what is wrong with this guy? This guy has just been made wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, and yet he lives like he's poor, like he has nothing. See, these people are all sitting there thinking, this is more than 20 years worth of wages. This guy gets it in one fell swoop. His master has made him wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, and yet he imagines that he's poor, that he has nothing. Maybe because he compares himself to the people that have the 2 talents or the 5 talents. In his mind, he thinks he's got next to nothing. And then he goes and acts on that thought by being afraid. That's the excuse that he gives when the master comes back and says, "Okay, folks, tell me what you did." He goes, "I was just too scared. I was paralyzed by fear." And because he's afraid, he goes and he does something absolutely bizarre. He takes 6,000 days' pay and he buries it in the ground, walks away, and does nothing. So it doesn't do him any good. It doesn't do the master any good. It doesn't do anybody any good. He just buries it in a hole. What is this guy's problem? Those people that heard Jesus must have wondered. He's rich beyond our wildest dreams, and yet he lives like he's poor. How could anybody be so blind and live like that? Yet I suspect that Jesus told this parable because it was easy for many people, even people who didn't consider themselves particularly wealthy, to be blessed with an abundance and yet consider themselves to be poor. After all, if a guy can have over $1 million and think he has nothing, how much easier would it be for somebody who has basically an average amount of income and an average amount of possessions to consider that they have less than nothing, and then to live as though God hadn't blessed them at all? But isn't that sometimes the problem that we face also? We live in a time and a place where even the poorest among us have an abundance compared to the vast majority of people in the world. Even when you consider how we live in this area and what we have and the opportunities that we have here, we're still blessed with much more than the average person even in our own country. Most of us kind of know that intellectually, and yet deep down, it's sometimes easy to get caught up in thinking and feeling and acting like we're really pretty poor. And after all, our society encourages us to think like this all the time. Because, we just went through a midterm election in which politicians on both sides of the aisle kept telling us how poor we are, or how much poorer we are than we ought to be. Maybe we're poor because our wages are too low, or they're stagnant. Or maybe we're too poor because our taxes are too high. Maybe we're too poor because both of those things are true. But either way, we're told over and over again that we are poor, and we are poorer than we ought to be, and we're taught to think of ourselves as poor. And then the holiday season comes upon us, and marketing starts to point out to us all of the things that we do not have, and all of the ways that people live, even those relatively few people that have the 2 talents or the 5 talents. And shouldn't you feel poor because you don't have those things, or you don't have those opportunities? Don't you feel like you're left out? That's the thing that we're told to feel each and every day as we look around and compare ourselves even to a relatively few people who have more than we have. And then, for a whole bunch of us too, we remember and sometimes are traumatized by the financial meltdown we had a few years ago, in which lots of us lost money or equity, and that sometimes causes people to just go and do really irrational things. I know a bunch of folks who have said, I will never invest again in anything. I will not put my money any place. I will just leave it in a bank account where it's, I guess in Jesus' day, if you put it in the bank, it would earn interest as opposed to right now where it really doesn't. But financial advisors tell us that there is no magic cure that's going to say this is guaranteed to earn you money. But they can guarantee us that if we figuratively or literally dig a hole in the ground and stuff it there, we will lose. And yet people do that because they think they've got nothing, they're scared, and they go and do irrational things. And means that even today, lots of us are tempted to live like this guy with the one talent. To think of ourselves as poor, even though God has blessed us with an abundance. And sometimes we don't even recognize that. I think that one of the reasons that Jesus told this parable is that he's making the point that no matter what level of abundance God gives us, it can be easy for any of us to fall into the trap of thinking and feeling and acting like we have nothing or next to nothing. In fact, it's sort of ironic at the end of this parable that you still feel bad for this guy, right? Because the master says, take the one talent from this guy who has, and give it to the guy with 10 talents, and he'll have nothing. But the irony is, he didn't have it in the first place. He had already given it up. He had buried it in the ground, walked away from it, and so the whole irony is that he had already taken it away from himself before the master ever came back. So that's sort of what Jesus is asking us. Have we taken the talent God has given to us and taken it away from ourselves? Is the judgment in this passage not that God does something to us, but that we're doing it for ourselves? So in a way, this parable is Jesus' call to us to live in a really kind of countercultural way. It's Jesus' call to stop buying in to the world telling us constantly that we're poor, and instead to consider how rich we are. And that means that we're still going to have the same amount of stuff and the same amount of abundance that we had before, but we'll think and we'll feel and we'll act differently if each day we start to consider how great our talent is instead of how little we have. There is right now a show going on PBS that's based on a book called How We Got to Now. And I've seen a couple of interviews with the author of this book, and he talks about the great technological innovations that have happened in the last 150 years or something like that. And they start out with things that are so basic we take them for granted. He said, clean drinking water. He says, we're able to actually go to the water fountain. No matter who you are in our society, you can go to the water fountain and drink and not worry that you're going to die of cholera or dysentery. He says, there's whole scores of people, millions and millions of people in our world that do not live with that. If you live in a place and in a time where you can get a drink of water and not die from it, you are wealthy beyond the belief of most of the people, or many of the people in our world. If you start to think like that, you start to recognize the abundance that God has given to us each and every day. It changes the way we think, and it helps us to focus on what we have instead of constantly listening to what we don't have or ought to have. And that can start to place us put us in a place where we can stop being so completely afraid. Because that's what drives a lot of the thinking and that we have nothing. It's the fear that we won't have enough. That's what the problem was with this guy that had the one talent. He was afraid he was going to lose it all. He was afraid he didn't have enough. The other two, by comparison, do not have a feeling of security. That's what we always think the opposite of fear is. If I could feel secure, then I'd be all right. But the opposite of the feeling of fear is a feeling of joy. The guy with the 2 talents and the guy with 5 talents come back, and the master says, enter into the joy of your master. But the other irony is, they're already there. You can feel it when they come back and they say, I took what you gave me, I did something with it. I'm really happy about what I was able to do with what you gave me. They're already feeling the sense of satisfaction of having done something. It's the reminder that, happiness is not an end goal. It's the result of being involved in something that has meaning. They were involved in something that had meaning. And because of that, the joy was able to overcome the fear. If we start to live like that, we'll start to find that the fear goes away, not because there's not all the problems still there, but because we'll start to be caught up in the joy of being able to do something that has meaning not only for ourselves, but for others. And that means sometimes just taking a step and doing something other than sticking something in the hole until a little bit later on when you feel like maybe it would be a better time. And that sometimes is really, really hard. Sadly, we've had in the bulletin for the last few weeks a note from the treasurer about where we are financially, and we're not down by huge amounts. In fact, we said at the beginning of the year that if every household in the congregation gave $5 a week more, we would be fine. And if that had happened, we would have no notes from the treasurer in the bulletin because there would be enough there. And $5 a week could be hard for a few people in our congregation. But for most of us, it's not that big a deal. It would be easy. We have the talent, we know. And a few people have done that. The reason that we put that in the bulletin for everybody is not to say, oh well, there we are, but to say, we know that together, God has given us the talent that we need, and we know we can do this. The thing is, it's impossible for anybody to give an extra $250 or $5 or even $1 if we are convinced in our mind that we are poor, that we have nothing, that God has not really actually given us a talent. But Jesus calls us to think about what we have, to use it joyfully, and to be willing to keep our talents out of the hole. Imagine what happens when we do that. So, later on, next week, you'll see also we're going to start our 2015 stewardship campaign. And in our stewardship campaign, it's really easy in all of our stewardship campaigns to get caught up in, well, it means a few more dollars here, an extra thing that I'm going to do over here, something like that. But this year, what we're really asking people to do and to consider is not just a few dollars one place or a couple of places to volunteer, but rather, what we're asking folks to do over the next few weeks is to consider your abundance. Think about the talent that God has placed in your hands. Think about the talent that you are. Consider how your talent can create joy in your life and in the lives of others. And when we ask you for a pledge, what we're really going to be asking you for is the commitment to keep your talent out of the hole and instead to use that talent for your good and for the good of others in our world.